Hi my friend, in this video we're going to be making a laid-back tech house song inspired by Deltech's song, I Don't Need That. And we're going to find out if we can do this in under 5 hours by using the 80-20 rule of tech house music production. What you're listening to right now is the song we'll be working on. And what you're looking at right now is the Ableton project file that we'll be working on. In particular, we're going to go in order how I actually built things out. So we're going to start with this drum group, going layer by layer as I built things out. Then this bass group, layer by layer. Then this melodic group, layer by layer. So that you can follow along when you're building out music like this and apply it to your own music. Make sure you stick around to the end of the video because we'll also be doing a recap of the 80-20 rule so that you can actually apply everything you're learning here to your own music instead of just watching a YouTube tutorial. Because all in all, it only took about 5 hours for me to build this one out. And now it's completely mixed, mastered, arranged, and ready to go, whether it's going to be used in DJ sets or sent out to labels. And if finishing songs faster just like this is something that you like help with, I've also made you a completely free bundle of templates, samples, and special bonuses that I use to completely finish a song like this every single week. Visit the link that's on screen now or in the description to grab your copy of the Ultimate Song Finishing Toolkit for free. And if you want to take things to the next level, you can also find a link to this video's project files in the description as well. With that said, let's jump into this. Alright. So when it comes to the drums for this one, as usual, what I like to do is throw in the reference track. So on this track right here, I have Deltech's song, I Don't Need That. I've turned it off on the track level and then set up so on my keyboard, when I press the S key, I can flick back and forth. And this is useful so that you can use this to reference your track as you're building it out. So what I have here is, first I usually will start off with the kick at this point. So let's take a look and listen to this. Let's kind of look at the pattern. And so the main thing you'll notice here is that it's just a center 4 on the floor, but there's this like little, on the third beat, this little extra bit. And then usually when you're adding kind of these little extra little accent note kind of things, it can be useful to bring down the velocity a bit so they're not as like powerful as the other hits. So it's just adding a little bit of pizzazz. So let's look at the pattern. Main thing is just flicking back and forth between the reference to make sure that you're kind of getting the same pattern done there. When it comes to the kick like that, it's usually pretty simple. Moving on to the sound design. So what I have here is a kick from Rocket Powered Sound, the Lie EDM kick. And the way that I found this was over here. I found a section of the song, like the Deltech tune, where the kick was just playing and then consolidated it. And then that way what you can do is press show in browser like this. Then once it's in the browser, you can press this little similar sound button and then click through and find a whole bunch of samples that sound similar to the source sound that you've added, which is a really cool feature in Ableton 12 that I really like to do. This way you can take the samples from the song that you want to emulate or reference and then find something that's similar. So you're not stealing it from the actual track, so it's like a bit higher quality, and it's not the exact sound, so it's a bit more ethical and I guess unique sounding too. So I ended up with this sound here. In terms of the processing, I usually don't do too much to the kick. So what we have here is this drum bus. So let me turn it off and on. It adds a little bit of like weight to it. This is without. And this is with. Main thing is what I like about this drum bus that's kind of cool. You can add a bit of saturation, which is nice. But it's this boom thing that I really like. So you can set the frequency to be in the same key. It doesn't have to be the same like root note of the scale that you're working in, but in the same key is useful. And then you can adjust the boom and then adjust the decay to create like that nice full body. And you can also use this damp feature. So with this damp all the way up, it's a bit clickier and maybe not as nice. So it's a nice way to remove some of the high end in your kick so that it blends nicely. If we listen to the reference, it does have a bit more of that rounder sound, I would say. Then, main thing other than that is flicking back and forth like this. Really paying attention to the volumes. When you get the volumes right, that's really one of that 80-20 rule right there. Get the right patterns, get the right sounds, get the right volumes, and then you don't have to do too much crazy like processing or anything like that. Because other than that, all I have is an EQ8 here, and I'm just using it as like an arrangement trick to remove some of the lows. Like I think it might happen right here. If you watch the EQ8 here, it just momentarily drops the lows out as like a little way to add some tension and release as a micro transition. Moving on, the next element that I added were the closed hi-hats. So let's take a look and listen to that. So a lot of like almost like white noise sounding, or like open hi-hats, but like having the tail end cut off sounds with this, with a cool little skippy pattern. So this is a look at the pattern I ended up with. If you have a look at it, it looks a little bit maybe complex, but usually this is how I go about things. First thing I have is like this first layer here. So it's just like the open hi-hat, closed hi-hat, like standard pattern in this kind of stuff where it's on the offbeat. So I'll start that off, and then I'll add in all this extra skippy notes in a couple of different ways. So how I ended up with this pattern was just flicking back and forth, really listening to just the closed hats. It's got that like shuffly, swingy little feel. So I basically just flipped back and forth between the reference and this, trying to get those sounds right. Another thing that I did kind of do with this one too, is if you like go to a spot in the song where the drums are, you can kind of like zoom in and like you can see where the transients are here to get a rough idea of where like the hits are, and then kind of compare here to like here, and like you can kind of use the waveform a little bit to help you out. I did that a little bit in this one as well. Then in terms of the sound design, what I did was I did that similar sound feature. So I found a point in the song, I believe maybe it was, I think this was the kick that I found, and over here was the hat. And I found a little bit where just one of the hats was playing, consolidated it, showed it in browser, and then found a bunch of different samples that were similar to it. I ended up with this CH Sleaze sample. And then what I also did was I just grabbed a bit of like the Deltech. I don't need it. I don't need that sound. So if I just pause this, you have a listen. Over here. So that I just grabbed right from the track. This I also grabbed from the track. And then what I did was like this here was using the similar sound feature. So the idea that I like to do is like if you grab stuff directly from like the reference track, it's still nice to do the similar sound feature so that you can find something in your library that's a one shot that's like maybe higher quality that you could use to layer up against the thing that you've snatched from the reference track. So that's what I kind of did there. And then one thing that I like to do here is switch up the different sounds that are playing and have like the velocities playing at different amounts too. These are just ways to kind of make things a little bit more human, a little bit more interesting too. And I think what I might have been doing, let's take a look. Sometimes what I might do is like within the device here, you can see here, this one's panned a little bit to the left. This one's panned a little bit to the right. This one is panned a little bit to the left. So you can use like the internal like simpler device to do some panning, which can be really nice. And then also you will notice here that the volumes are changed a little bit too. So usually the standard volume in a Ableton Simpler device is -12. So you can see here that I've made some adjustments to some of these sounds. Main thing again though is like flicking back and forth, trying to get the right sounds, the right pattern, and the right volumes. So not perfect, but definitely similar. And then also a good thing to do at some point, you want to start taking liberties and making your own creative decisions so you're not fully just copying the track. But then other than that, in terms of the processing here, I did throw the transient little device that I have here, which is just this free killer transient shaper. Use it to like tighten up sounds. Or in this instance, I use it to bring up the sustain quite a bit so that it's making this hat sound, this closed hat sound a little bit more like an open hat by increasing the sustain on it. That was just one thing I did. I don't think I added much processing to any other of these hi-hat devices. And then on the entire hi-hat group here, just using the standard channel strip that I usually have. So we're just removing a bunch of the lows so that it's kind of keeping that high. I think in this track, when I was hearing it does sound like they're a little bit higher. No, I think it's still pretty full-bodied hi-hats. But the main idea that you want to do here is remove some of the lows so that it's not interfering with like the kick and the bass or anything like that. Hi-hats are usually higher frequency sounds, so you don't need as much of the low end, so it's nice to remove it there. And then I'm using a little bit of Ableton saturation here, which is the Ableton saturator. As you can see here, I've just mapped the main knob to a Ableton rack so that it's easier to use. You'll see I do that quite a bit. And this is just kind of making the sound a bit fuller and also making it so that there's a little bit like kind of grit and like character added to the hats as well. Kind of brings them out a little bit. The next element that I added was the snare. So let's have a look and listen to that. And for this, basically what I did was, it's like the standard kind of snare pattern that you'll normally see in tracks. So it's on the 2, the 4, the 2, and the 4. And then what I usually like to do is I like to have like, usually I like to have multiple snares. And then what you can do is you're layering them up. When you're layering them up like this, you can have it so different snares are playing at different times. So it's like the same, the 2, same 2, same 2, and then on the 4th something changes. There's a way to kind of keep some movement going and a little bit of humanization and just makes the sound a little bit more interesting rather than the exact same hit at the exact same velocity happening all the time. So that's a look at that. In terms of the sound, I might have did some kind of like snatching from this. I think maybe. Because also another thing you can do is try to find an area in the tune where just the snare's playing, but it's usually going to be overlapped with the kick, so it could be a little difficult. So you might want to like move it onto another track and then remove some of the lows and then consolidate it and then do the similar sound feature. So you're kind of isolating the snare in the reference track a bit more before going through the sound similarity search, or else you'll get a lot of kick drums in it when you're doing that. So in this instance, I'm not sure if I did that. I think I just kind of looked through my samples and then just looked for something that kind of sounded similar by just jumping back and forth, just like that. And then once I found the right sounds that I was happy with, then just a little bit of processing, not much here, just removing a bit of the lows. So you're kind of getting rid of, not preventing any kind of low frequency buildup and making it so that the kick and the bass can shine through. You don't really want like a bass heavy snare. Usually, maybe there might be some weird case where you do want that, but not here. Again, then, main thing, making sure the pattern's right, the sounds are similar, and the volumes are as close as you can get it. That way, you're building up against a professional track, and yours is going to sound professional too. The next thing that I added is this clap. So have a look and listen. So if you listen to it, I'm going to turn it off for a second. It's just kind of adding a little bit of like high end almost to it. This is off. It almost sounds tighter and not as high, and then it's going to sound almost wider and more high end on. And so you can see the pattern is kind of similar on the 2 and the 4, 2 and the 4. In terms of the sound design, I have this this rack here. Actually, all this stuff is usually like the kick, the snare, the claps. All this stuff is in this group, and I just drag the group on, and I'm ready to go. And I have a bunch of clap sounds and snare sounds and hat sounds in these drum racks already that I usually like. So what I did here was simply just like auditioned it by either like grabbing it here and going up and down until I found something similar. But I've also added this drum selector, so you can kind of like move it here. And then that's another way that you can use this to quickly reference. That way you're just quickly like jumping between the different clap samples that you have and then just jumping back like this as you're changing clap sounds to find something that works. So that's how I went about this for the clap sound. Didn't do any similar sound functionality or anything like that. And then in terms of the processing, we're just removing a bunch of the lows, same reason as before, a little bit of saturation to kind of bring out like fill up the sound a little bit, make it come out a little bit more, add a little bit of grit. The main thing is flipping back and forth, getting the volumes as close as you can. And also when you're layering sounds like this, the claps, you kind of want to really listen to how it's interacting with your snare sound. You kind of want them to sound really symbiotic, like they're almost the same. Then usually at this point, once I get the core sounds done, like the kick, the hi-hat, the open hat, the snare, clap, those kind of elements, usually what I like to do, and actually in this case I added the open hat later, but usually what I like to do after that is add in top loops or like drum breaks as a way to kind of add more character and vibe to the sound in a lot of ways. And also like in this track, it's kind of part of the arrangement where you'll see it's just like kick, hat, and snare, clap, and then this additional element comes in as you're going through the arrangement. You'll see here this is the full like kind of intro, and he adds in this cool little bit here, something like this. Let me solo it for you. And then let's listen to the reference. So if you listen to the reference here, listen to all the hats. Now listen to the section just before it. Listen to the hats. And then now the section we're on now. Hear how he adds additional hats and almost like a top loop or something like that. That's exactly what I was kind of trying to emulate here. So I did this just by looking up like, I think it was like drum loop or house drum loop or something like that on Splice. Just kind of like looked around until I found something that was mostly just very skippy, hi-hatty with like little open hats happening and all that kind of stuff. Cool way to add like extra energy to the track. And so I grabbed this and then threw it on there. And then in terms of any processing, just removing some of the lows, a little bit of one knob sidechain. So this is helping it pump and making room for the kick. And then it also gives it that like dancey, pumpy sound. The way that I do it is I have the Ableton Shaper running on at a rate of 1/4, which is usually the kicks are moving on quarter notes like that. And then it's just ducking the gain. So you don't have to add in a compressor and route it and play with all the fucking compressor knobs and shit like that just to get like a basic sidechain pumping sound. This way it's just like a nice one knob situation. Boom, you're done. Then adding in some saturation to kind of bring this sound out a little bit more, add some grit. And then I'm using this one knob width plugin. So what this is a free plugin from Polyverse called Wider, and I've just mapped the main knobs to an Ableton rack so that it's just super easy to use. You don't have to open up the device and all this kind of stuff, and you can just mix as you go, kind of more using your ears. And what this is doing is making it sound a little bit more stereo, so pushing it to the left and right a little bit. And then this way, it's making space for all these elements that we have like center pan. So like some of the hats, the kick is center, some of the snares and stuff like that. And this way it's creating more stereo space, but also making room for the other core elements that we have more centered. And then other than that, I'm running it into a K-clip. This is not free, but there's a free version. And I'm mostly using this to clip the sound a little bit. So it's adding some headroom, but also without this, if you look on the mixer level here, let me like just turn that off for a second and then have a look. So you can see here, it's peaking above 0. So a clipper is a nice way to add headroom, and it can also be a really nice way to make sure that your tracks aren't going above 0. So you're controlling all the dynamics a little bit more and preventing any digital clipping or anything like that. But other than that, main thing was listening back and forth. And this one, again, it's an additional element. So you really need to kind of like zone in on this one. We're listening to the reference right now. And then listen to the additional. So that's what you really got to try to pay attention to. It's a really like subtle layer, but it's really cool. I really like that they did that. So let's move on to the next one, which I think is probably gonna be a little bit of a shaker loop, but let's have a look and listen. And let's solo it a bit. So again, I don't know if there's much of a shaker. Maybe a little bit, but not like a full shaker loop. But I kind of liked the idea of adding more skippiness like this to the sound. And I like the shaker loop vibe. So again, kind of at this point, taking liberties, trying to make it a little bit more original so it's on a super carbon copy. So I found a little cool shaker loop, removing some of the lows, but it's already, most of the lows are gone in the sample. A little side change, so it's pumping a little width. So this is again pushing it to the left and right. And then I was building this out. I felt like my hat situation was still lacking, so I added 2 more additional layers. What I have is this hat loop here, so let's have a look and listen to this. And let's have a listen to the reference. If you hear that like open hat sound on like the offbeat, that's kind of what I was trying to add in a bit more. So have a listen to that. And then I feel like it was throughout the whole track, that open hat sound. I think my track's a little bit louder, but. So I noticed that, and so I actually added it to the rest of the track. Usually I try to do it piece by piece, moving through the arrangement. But in this case, I was like, oh, this needs to be added to the entire drum beat. So I added that in. In terms of any processing, what do we have going on here? We're moving some of the low end here, a little bit side chain, so it's pumping, and that's about it. Main thing again is the volumes, but at this point I think it's adding a lot more volume, so I'm also a little bit more kind of pushing this into an original territory here. And then the last thing is this open hi-hat sound. have a look at the MIDI. So it's just on the offbeats. Just went through an open hat rack that I have here, went through the selector to try to find something similar, and then in terms of any processing, removing a bit of lows, tightening it up with this the transient device, and it's just a way to kind of fill out the sound a little bit more. I felt like there was a little bit more open, sustained sounding sounds in their track that I was trying to add in here. And that's kind of look at that. The other thing I do want to mention is if you have a look at absolutely everything here, one thing I did was in the groove, I added in this 40% groove. And so it's a 16th note groove from the groove tool on some of like the main sounds. It's the MPC 16 at the 61 level of it. And what I did is on some of the loops to make it kind of tighten up with the rest of the core sounds that I have. I added on the same MPC 1661 groove, but then adjusted the timing so it's just 40% of the time. So this way, it's also adding the same groove that I've applied to all the one shots here to the loops as well, but not fully. I find when it's full, it can make it sound too off and kind of weird. But this way with 40%, it's somewhat pushing it all together into the same groove and can kind of tighten up the sound a little bit. So yeah, that's a look at that. All right. So when it comes to the bass for this one, it's actually pretty simple. And so first things first, what I usually like to do is I'll throw in the reference track that I'm working on. So Deltech song, I Don't Need That is in the track here. I've turned it off and I've set it up so when I press the S key, I can flick back and forth like that. So let's have a quick listen to the Deltech one. So you can hear it's mostly just like a sub bass with like a little bit of texture to it in like the low mid area. So I'm going to show you kind of how I approach this, because when I was recreating it, I kind of liked how it sounded, but I went for something a little bit more different. If you listen to this, however, something a little bit different, I would say, to try to kind of capture the same vibe. So the way that I did this is, the first thing I did after creating the drums is I went and found a vocal that I wanted to work with, because I've been finding if you kind of just recreate a song's bass straight up without knowing what your vocal is going to be, it can be really, really tough to get the vocal to work later. So what I actually did first in this instance is I'm going to just turn on the melodic group that I have here, and I'm going to show you a little snippet of the vocal that I added. So it was this. And so I kind of, if you listen to the part in the Deltech song where the vocals are in there, yeah, it's actually here too. Yeah, of course. So sick. I'm gonna listen to what I have. Turning this back on, and then the reference. So maybe you can kind of hear what I was going for with that. I felt like the Deltech song had that similar vibe of like a G6. When I was hearing it, it just kind of reminded me of a little bit. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do like a remix of that. So I went and grabbed the vocal for that, just looked up YouTube acapella, kind of dropped that in there, and then set it up the timing against my drums so that I could start building up the bass against that. And I was kind of flicking back and forth between like a G6 tune and the Deltech tune to try to find some kind of like middle ground between the two. And then what I did was, let's actually have like a look at the MIDI. Essentially what I did is like, I'm gonna pause it and sing unfortunately for a little bit, but like the like a G6, like the bass line's like how does it go again? However it goes, or maybe I won't sing it then. I kind of listened to that original like a G6 bass line and then like played that in here and then flicked back and forth between the like a G6 bass line and the Deltech bass line and tried to find some kind of middle ground between them by removing notes and adjusting it a little bit, so that way it could work nicely as like a G6 kind of remix flip here. So this is a look at the MIDI here. I'm not great at explaining music theory, so just have a look at it. I believe the tune is in E flat major, and what I was basically just doing was listening back and forth, like I was saying, to get the notes correct. And then main thing is like adding in those extra little bits at the end, those kind of things, trying to make it sound similar. I wish I could explain this more. I have no idea what kind of music theory is going in here, but the main thing is setting up that reference key that you can flick back and forth, and that way you can just use your ear and just kind of adjust notes to get things to sound similar. Once you have a pattern set up like this, then it's best to take a look at the sound design. So the first thing is this sub layer here. And so let's take a look at this. So what I have here is a little device I made called the V sub, and all this is enables an operator just running sine waves. So the idea is to use a sub layer to really take care of all that low end, and like a really nice proper sub is really just the sine wave without too much going on. So basically what I have is this device that's just running like a super simple sine wave sub, and then I have a couple different options to add in different amounts of drive to shape the sound a little bit more and to have it come out of like laptop speakers a little bit. And then I do have a sidechain, one knob sidechain built into this as well, so it's kind of pumping, making room for the kick. And then also a high shelf that I've removed. This is all the way up. So just rolling off a bunch of the highs, so it's really mostly just a sub layer. Then the main thing after that is to set the levels right, so just flick back and forth. Really just focusing on the low end. Right here you're hearing quite a lot of that like low mid bass coming out. It's almost like almost nasally. When dialing in the sub, you want to try to just focus on the low end. Something like that. So I think I dialed it in a little bit more because as you're building your own tune, you're going to want to start making your own liberties with it. That's a good look at that. Another reason that I like to have the sub layer and the mid bass like separated is that you can control the low end a lot more, and that way when you're working on the mid bass you can just focus on the sound design without worrying about it messing up your low end. But then also, like I mentioned before in these videos, working with a sub, it's such a pure sound. It's almost like when you're writing the notes, it's similar to when some people might write notes, like figure out the patterns and the notes and the chords with a piano or a guitar, because it's so uncolored and no crazy sound design going on, so that you can really just focus on making sure you're in key and hitting the right notes and all that. Kind of similar idea with a sub here. So the next thing I added in was this mid bass layer, which sounds a little different from the original. Let's have a listen to the reference. So I went with a bit more like a rounder sound, almost a little bit like that, like I did it a while ago, can't remember what it was, but what the Whitney Houston remix version. But anyways, went for a slightly different sound. Let's have a look at the MIDI. So you'll notice here that there's no MIDI playing on this mid bass. The reason why is what you can do is on the mid bass layer, if you change it from all ins to a different Ableton track, it'll actually bring in the MIDI here into this mid bass layer. And what I find useful at this is that way you're not copying and pasting over any of the MIDI notes. If you make any changes and need to, as you're developing the arrangement or anything, you don't have to do it 2 times. It's actually just going to route straight in. This makes things a little bit simpler and cleaner. The one thing I do like to do also is have this Ableton pitch device, so that if the octave that the sub is playing on is too high or low, you can quickly adjust it with this without having to change the MIDI or anything like that. So the sound that I went for here is that kind of like classic house organ sound. So in Ableton, I just looked up organ and found this basic organ bass, removed a bunch of the highs. So it's a little bit more kind of like that mid bass sound I was kind of going for. And then also if you listen to the track, I feel like it does actually bring in a mid bass sound at some point. So let me show you it over here, I believe. Or here. So at this point in the track, around the first drop, I increased the pitch, because if you listen to the reference, there's that higher sound. It's kind of like an organ. Compared to over here, gone. And now listen to it, it's following the same note. Kind of organy, right? So that's kind of what I was going for. And then ended up keeping it as the kind of mid bass layer too at certain points. I keep it kind of consistent in a weird way. So have a look at that, kind of using it also as like the mid synth layer. Other than that, any processing here is when you do kind of this idea of a sub versus mid bass layer. On the mid bass layer, you're going to want to remove a lot of the low end here. So in this case, I'm doing under 100 hertz. So you might want to go up to 200 hertz sometimes. You just want to make room for the sub to come through nicely. You don't want overlapping sub frequencies. You want that one sub track to take care of all that. So there's removes the idea of like mud or any overlapping buildup in the low end that could sound like crap. You just want the sub to shine through on there. And then other than that, I'm not sure why I have a utility on here. I was thinking of something, I guess. And then I have this one knob with plugin on the mid bass, and this is the free plugin from Polyverse called Wider. And I've just mapped the main knobs to an Ableton rack just to make it a lot simpler to use, and you don't have to open up the plugin and all that kind of stuff. And this is just making the mid bass sound a little bit wider, which kind of makes the bass feel a little bit fuller and wider as well. And then I'm running into this little rack here that I made, which is just in a sidechain. This is the same sidechain that's in that V sub, just over here. SC is sidechain for me. And it's just an Ableton shaper doing kind of like the LFO tool shape, going to quarter notes. The kick's usually pumping on quarter notes, and then it's just dropping down a gain. So this way you don't have to like route compressors and all that kind of stuff and adjust the compressor knobs to get a simple pumping sidechain. You can just do it with one knob. And that's pretty much a look at that. Let me know in the comments below if I can explain any of this stuff further. Particularly, I know I'm not good at explaining like the notes here, but just take a look at it. Try to explain the thought process of how I was going through it, particularly the idea of trying to find a middle ground between copying a reference and also turning it into something original. That's something I'm always trying to stress with this. And hopefully you're doing something similar as well. It can be useful to try to do carbon copy remakes just for your, own education. But I'm thinking you might as well turn it into something original that you can release. Use the references more as ways to make sure that you're getting similar sounds. Make sure that you're getting similar volume levels so that you're not having to worry about the mixing of it and any of that kind of stuff. You're just kind of emulating a professional track in all those regards, but then starting to take your own chances and make your own original decisions so that you're getting this combination of a track that's been built up against a high quality song in terms of levels and sound design and all that, but then is also original and something that you can use to release at some point. It's kind of the idea that I'd like to push, at least. Yeah, let's look at that. And then on the bass group layer, I'm doing a little bit of group processing to kind of glue these elements together. So I have a K-clip coming in here, bringing down the input a bit so that it's not clipping too much. I use a lot of clippers to control the amount of digital distortion and clipping that's happening, and to make sure that the things aren't going above zero, basically. So I'm bringing it down, adding a little bit of clip. Actually, nothing clip, just trying to make sure that it's not going above zero because it was before. Running into a compressor a little bit to kind of glue the sound a bit together, running into parallel compression a little bit to add a little bit of fullness, and that's really about it on this one. All right. So when it comes to the synths for this one, there's a couple of little things I want to show you that I've been kind of changing in my workflow in the last little bit. So first thing, one of the things I haven't really been changing is throwing the actual reference track that you want to build against in your track, turning it off, and setting up the S key or any key on your keyboard so you can flick between them. And what you have. Just like that. And what this does, it helps you be able to select the right kind of patterns, select the right sounds as you're building up the drums and the bass and the synths and all that. And then also, main thing is get the right volumes. That way you can make your track sound professional as you're building it out. When you're mixing as you go, setting the right volumes, that's really kind of the trick to the 80-20 rule. If your volumes and your sound selection is similar to the track that you're building against, it's going to sound similar quality level and professional and all that kind of stuff. Nice little hack. That's something I always do. But the other thing that I've been doing in the last little while is, particularly if you're going to be building your track in a way that there's a particular hook, whether it's chords or some kind of melody, or in most examples, a vocal, bring that vocal into your project as quickly as possible and build against that as you're building out the drums and the bass and your melodic elements like synths and vocals. And this is going to be super important because I've been finding this to be true, and maybe you've seen this as well. If you build out your track in a kind of conventional way of drums, then bass, then synths, and then vocals, if you add vocals near the end, everything you've built could be so incompatible with the vocals that you have to go back and make so many changes, and it makes everything so frustrating and confusing. So having the vocals in as quickly as possible is a huge tip, I'd say, if you're working with a particular hook that you want to be building around. If you're, making it up as you go and all that, then it is what it is. But if you already know what your main hook is, it can make everything so much more helpful because you're building against that and make sure you can make everything kind of glue together in that kind of way. So one of the first things that I did add into this track was the vocal that I wanted to work on. And so you might be able to kind of see a little preview of it here, or you heard it already in the intro. But if you have listened to the vocals of the Deltech tune, something about the girl voice and the cadence of it reminded me of this. The reference? Kind of similar vibe. I don't know if you didn't pick up on that. So I was like, yo, this is fucking sick. I'm gonna fucking do a flip of like a G6 tune in a cool way. So that's kind of what I heard. And so I grabbed this vocal. In terms of finding it, you can see here, Far East Movement like a G6 acapella HD. Yeah, I grabbed it from YouTube. You can find all sorts of acapellas on there, and you can use things like Lala and Fader and all sorts of like AI splitters if you can't find an acapella, but you might be able to just find it somewhere on YouTube or something like that. So in this case, I just grabbed it from YouTube. Another thing that I've been doing for the last little bit is, instead of building out the drums right away, what I've been doing is just snatching like a loop from the drums. So let me just show you this over here. And then let me just show you the intro to the Deltech song. Hear the bass in it, and then it's gone here. So what I did, and what I've been doing a lot in the last little bit, is like trying to get like an extended version of the track so that I can grab a spot where the drums are, and knowing that I can emulate the drums later, which you've seen in like the drum section of this tutorial or the previous series. It's pretty easy to emulate the drums, so I'm finding it can be useful to snatch a part of the drums and then start building out like the bass and the vocals against that, knowing that you can super easily recreate the drums later. It just kind of saves some time and makes it so that you don't like build out all these drums and then start adding in the bass and notice that the bass isn't working and you have to like find a new reference track and you wasted a bunch of time. It can be a nice way to you can build out your track against just a loop that you've grabbed from the actual track and then go back later and recreate the drums. Just making sure that everything's working together for you like that. So let's go through the melodic elements here. So I'm going to put on the vocals for a little bit. I'm going to be turning them off for the most part so that, my voice isn't overlapping and it's kind of hard to understand what's going on. So I'll turn it on for a little bit and let's listen to it. I'm going to show you the processing. So the main thing here is in the Deltech tune, if you listen to it, there's almost like two sections. So I found something with two sections. There's like kind of like this part, like this main hook, and then this as well. And so when you find a vocal like that, where there's just like one or two sections as opposed to like a full verse and multiple verses and choruses, it makes it a little easier when you're jumping in and trying to like adjust the warp markers to make sure that your stuff's on time. So in this case, it was just these two sections. I jumped in, I added a few warp markers to make sure that it sounded like in time and good with the track. Switched it to Complex Pro and then adjusted the formants and envelope a little bit to kind of make it sound a little bit more natural. That's pretty much it there. And then in terms of processing, removing a bunch of the lows so it's making like the kick on the bass and not overly mudding up the low end. A little bit of weird things that I added in here. I have this crystallizer, and this is a little bit more of like an arrangement trick at certain points in the tune. If I show you this, you can see over here, I had like, this is what it sounds like with the crystallizer. Listen to like the weird, those little weird sounds. It's like a granular delay. I love that kind of stuff. And I use it to like throw it on sometimes to kind of fade it into the next track as almost like a transition kind of method. And I just love the sound of it. It's super interesting. Then other than that, we're just doing some one knob sidechain. So what I have set up here is an Ableton Shaper device going through that like LFO tool kind of shape, and it's going to quarter notes and just it's ducking the gain in this kind of shape and at this rate. The kick drum is usually at quarter notes, so by doing this method, you don't have to like route a compressor and adjust all the compressor settings on all that annoying stuff just to get like a simple kind of dance pump. You can just do it with one knob and move on. At certain points in the song, I added this shifter sound. Let me see when that comes on so I can just show you what that looks like. Again, this was like almost more of a, where is it here? This is almost more of like an arrangement trick. So if you listen to the vocal here for a bit, and then right here, it's adding that like little lower end bit. It's again more of an arrangement trick so that the vocal's looping a ton throughout this, and it's a way to make it sound a little bit more different, like something's changing and moving throughout the track. So that's kind of look at the vocals. Again, main thing is throwing that on as quickly as possible. The next kind of synth element that I added, I actually want to show you this bass. So I do go over this more in the bass section, but if we go over to the mid bass here, and I want to show you this particular automation with the pitch. So, okay, maybe a little bit hard to see here, but what I have is two versions of the bass. So if we listen to the bass around more of the intro, you can hear it. It's like that kind of organ sound. Then if you listen to it like midway through the song, so you can hear that in the Deltech song as well. So here's like more of the intro. It's more of like a bass guitar sound or like analog synth. And then midway through, it's almost like a cool little organ sound. And so the way I went about this is it's actually something I learned from that Wessel and whatever track. I did it a couple of weeks back. It might still be on the Beatport Tops. But it's like that very classic organ sound. And so the way I've been about it is maybe a little bit different, but I made it so that is the mid bass sound at the beginning. And then I just flip it up an octave. And then it ends up almost becoming more of like a synth sound. And it's just following the exact same kind of bass pattern basically. So super simple stuff. You'll notice that in this track as well, there's not a lot of stuff going on. If you listen here, it's vocal, bass, drums, and that kind of like additional organ a little bit. And that's it. So what I did at this point was I added in a few extra little things, and I'll show you what I added to kind of fill the sound a little bit. I added this little weird thing. Let me show you it over here. Right here. It's very subtle, so let me solo it too. Weird little sound. I added a crystallizer, so it's adding some like of that, you know, that weird little crystal-y granular sound that I really like. Playing a lot with the EQ, removing a lot of the high end. Really trying to make this subtle. It's just adding a little bit of vibe to the track, because again, want to try to keep it to the original. Like there's not a lot of synths and extra stuff going on, so super subtle little bit of character to add there. Little one-off sidechain, a little bit of Ableton saturation. This is the Ableton saturator mapped to a one rack here, or one knob rack. Got a cat going here, nuts. Just makes things a little easier, so you can kind of mix with your ears and just as you go instead of opening up plugins and stuff. Same thing here. There's a free plugin called Polyverse Wider. Just map the main knobs to an Ableton rack here, so that it kind of it's just faster to use, and it's really subtle. But it's using this to push things to the left and right, make it a bit more stereo, making stuff in the middle have its own space, and then that stutter effect using the A1 Trigger Gate, which is a free plugin again, kind of adding that cool stutter sound. And so it's very subtle mixed in there if you can try to listen for it. just adding a little bit of something extra there. And then what I also did add in was this additional synth here. If you listen to the reference, there's nothing like that. So this is just something that I like to do, is like try to follow the reference track at a certain point, and then at a certain point let your own track help guide you to make additional decisions. So you're making something a little bit more original and something that you can actually release as opposed to just a carbon copy. The way I went about this is you'll notice that it's this red color that I usually do my basses. So it's the exact same notes as the bass line. And what I've done though, and it's actually the same sound too, or is it a Watson organ? The mid bass is a basic organ bass. So I think it's in the same, family almost. Got a needy cat here. So it's the same bass sound, and then it's the same bass pattern that's being played with a slightly different organ sound. So it's like in the same family of like organs. And what I've done is I just chucked an Ableton arpeggiator here, played around with the different like styles of arpeggiation, and then found something that kind of like makes it sound skippy and interesting. And if we also solo it against the bass, it's pretty cool, I think. And it's a nice way to make it so everything's similar, I guess. There's nothing too out of left field happening. I am playing with the filter cutoff, and the release and stuff has more of like a little arrangement bit, so things are moving throughout the track. Moving some of the lows here so that it's not interfering with the kick or the bass or anything like that. We're going to get into a big part of it here in a second, but again, some one knob sidechain, so it's pumping. The width plugin, so it's adding some stereo and making room for stuff in the middle. And then a big thing here is I throw on that A1 trigger gate thing, which gives it that cool stuttery stutter house kind of thing. Yeah, that's kind of a look at all of that. We'll do a recap of the 80-20 rule so we can apply everything that you've been learning here to your own tracks when it comes to synths and vocals like that. But I also do want to mention before we do that, this video has been sponsored by our good friends over at Rocket Powered Sound. They hooked up in particular, if you listen to the kick drum that's being played in this track, it's a kick from their Ultimate Sample Pack, which is a sample pack filled with over 1,000 iconic and usable sounds. And if you want to grab that, you can get that for 30% off by using the link in the description and the code that's on screen now, Ultimate Best Friends. So yeah, big thank you to them for sponsoring the video and hooking up our community like that. And if you do grab the project files for this, you'll also get the Rocket Powered Sound samples built into this as well. So really big thank you to them for hooking us up like that. And with that said, let's jump into the 80-20 rule for this one.
Hi my friend, Matt from Best Friends Club here. And if you've been paying attention to this super long video, then you've probably figured out what the 80-20 rule is when it comes to building out your songs. The goal here is to get 80% of the result with only 20% of the time, energy, and effort. And because the first key to the 80-20 rule here is to use a reference track, we're making sure that we're very easily hitting 80% of a high quality, professionally made song. In particular, we use that reference track to make sure that we're picking the right notes, sounds, and volumes as we're building out our song. The second key of the 80-20 rule here is to mix as you go in an extremely streamlined way by only focusing on the volume of each track, as well as using a simple repeatable channel strip for each track that we're adding to our songs. The third and final key is to repurpose your old project files and have a suite of powerful templates, Ableton racks, and one knob effects that you've personalized and curated over time. If you'd like to get a head start by downloading all the racks, templates, and all the files that you've seen me use in the Ableton project file for this video, or if you'd just like to take a closer look at any of the techniques or tracks you saw me work on in this video at your own pace, you can find a link to this video's project files on screen now and at the second link that's in the YouTube description. I'm recreating a different song from the Beatport top charts every single week and making the project files available to anyone who wants them. You'll also get access to a private Discord where you can ask me and the community questions, as well as share tracks for feedback. If you or your music are not quite ready for a shot in the arm like that, I've also made you a completely free bundle of templates, samples, and special bonuses that have helped me figure out how to completely finish one new song each and every single week. And you can grab that free Ultimate Song Finishing Toolkit by visiting the first link that's in the YouTube description here. However, if you just feel like staying on YouTube for now, that's totally fine. Save that link for later, and check out this playlist filled with videos just like the one you just watched, where I completely create songs inspired by tracks found in the Beatport top charts. Or if you really want to take what you've learned in this video to the next level, make sure you check out this video right here.